in order for you and me to devise some kind of method or strategy to offset some of the events or repetition of the events that have taken place here in Los Angeles recently, we have to go to the root. We have to go to the cause. Dealing with the condition itself is not enough. And it is because of our effort toward getting straight to the root that people oftentimes think we're dealing in hate. We are oppressed. We are exploited. We are downtrodden. We are denied not only civil rights, but even human rights. So the only way we're going to get some of this oppression and exploitation away from us or aside from us is come together against the common enemy. Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate? You should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you? And I, for one, as a Muslim, believe that the white man is intelligent enough. If he were made to realize how black people really feel and how fed up we are without that old compromise and sweet talk. Stop sweet talking him. Tell him how you feel. Tell him what kind of hell you've been catching, and let him know that if he's not ready to clean his house up, if he's not ready to clean his house up, he shouldn't have a house. It should catch on fire and burn down.
Malcolm X, but on a host of other topics. Professor Grant was one of the best researchers I've ever met in my life. And for him to be the age group that he was in, the knowledge that he had about how to, manipulate the internet was beyond anybody else I've ever met as well. The brother could read in German. He had a lot of books in German. He just was a gem in our community. How many of you guys ever met Professor Grant? By show of hands? All right, so Professor Grant is going to have his homegoing service on the 8th of June, and we'll get more information out about that as well. We had to wait till some people from the East Coast wanted to come over. He's from the New York area, the Harlem area, so we had to wait to get people's travel schedules over. But let me get right into the information. So my background on Malcolm X is twofold. One is I come from a family of civil rights in the Harlem area. My grandfather, we were connected with the King family. Two, Professor Grant being one of my main teachers. And three, I also have a background in the Nation of Islam from the early 90s. Because I hold a black belt in Shotokan Karate, I was able to be a bodyguard for Louis Farrakhan and for Dr. Khalid Abdul Muhammad. Peace be upon him as well, Ashe. So we're going to get into the slides. I'm not going to take too much time on each one. That's Professor Grant, Ashe?
Ashe.
Wow. This cord is not that long, okay. And that's just him holding my presentation, because before I did this presentation in public, I had to get with him and we went through every single slide, and he had to slap my hand a bunch of times on a bunch of mistakes I made, and I had to correct my mistakes. And that's what students are, that's what teachers are for. Ashe. How many of you read this book? Clap your hands. Does anybody have a copy of this book today with them? No? This book changed a lot of lives, mine included, and a lot of people before me. And what I'm going to be talking about, some of it will be coming out of this book, from the mind of Malcolm, and some of it will be coming from elders that I've sat with and talked to who walk with Malcolm. Next slide. Go back to that last slide real quick. Look a little like Steph Curry right there, doesn't it? When Steph Curry's little pictures and stuff. Yeah, next slide. So in my long presentation, I deal with 4 different spans, or 8 different spans of Malcolm's life. But Malcolm was kind of like a schizophrenic person a little bit. So he had different, depending on what year you met him, you met a different person, basically. You might have met Detroit Red, okay? You might not have wanted to meet him. You might have met Malcolm Little. You might have met El Haj Malik El Shabazz Omawali, and you might have met just Malcolm X. And depending on what year or what time period or decade you met him, you got a different person. So we're going to talk about all those people. Next slide. Okay, so Malcolm Little, I broke his different personalities down into different time periods. I would say Malcolm Little was from the time of birth up until 1941. Detroit Red was from 1941 until 1952. Malcolm X would be 1952 till 1963. And then El Haj Malik Al Shabazz Omawali would be basically 1964 and 1965. And most of us wish we had a whole lot more time with this last one. Next slide. So basically what I learned from him is these 4 core principles: leadership, courage, integrity, and discipline. There is a speech by Louis Farrakhan, actually. He did this in 1990. He spoke at Malcolm X College in Chicago. And he was comparing his life to Malcolm's life. But in that speech, he was talking about how everybody back then said Malcolm was the most disciplined man they ever met. Because he was embarrassed about his former life as Detroit Red and the time he spent in prison and what he was doing to get to prison, when he got out of prison, he decided to make it up to the community and kind of make it up to himself. So he imposed upon himself stricter laws than that were already imposed upon him by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the restrictive laws of the Nation of Islam. And what I mean by that is, the brother didn't even chew gum. He didn't eat candy, he didn't snack in between meals, ate 1 meal a day, got up every day at 5 a.m. He was never late to an appointment. He was like a robot almost. He would show up at the appointment maybe a minute or two before, and be walking through the door 30 seconds before, and be sitting down right on the dime. That was Malcolm X, and that's what reminded me of my grandfather, because as my sister could tell you, my grandfather was just like that. My grandfather hated to be made late. Timing was everything. He would always tell me, whatever you gotta do, leave 15 minutes early to make sure. It's better to be early than to be walking through late with an excuse, right? So that was Malcolm X. He was very disciplined. Matter of fact, even the coroner's office, when they got his body, remember he was 39 years old. They said they'd never seen a body that clean on the inside when they opened him up to do the autopsy. They were surprised that he was even 39 years old. They'd never seen anybody that clean. That just shows you the discipline this man had. Next slide. So this period is from 1925 to 1930, when Malcolm was a little boy. Next slide. Those are his parents. That's Earl and Louise Little, Ashe. And as you know, Malcolm was going to be somebody whether or not he met people later in life because of who his parents were anyway. His dad was a powerful, powerful guy. His dad, Malcolm, the reason why Malcolm even had the thought of coming up with the Muhammad Speaks newspaper, which he actually made it in a basement, is because his dad was involved in the Negro World, which was the paper of the UNIA. His dad was also a regional leader. His dad was not just a follower of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. He was a leader in Garvey's movement, all right? This guy was a powerful guy. Say what? And yes, his mother too. Yes, his mother too. Next slide. I think you skipped one. Can you go back? Huh? Can't go back? That's just a plaque at the birth site, Omaha, Nebraska. A lot of people think Malcolm was from New York because he spent time there working, but he was actually from Omaha, Nebraska, Lansing, Michigan, okay? So next slide. In 1926, Malcolm's family relocated to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was only 1 year old. Next slide. Now, this group of people go by several names. Back then, they weren't always called the Ku Klux Klan. They weren't always called the White Citizens Council. They had a whole lot of monikers and names, and I think that the name of the group that was agitating Malcolm's family was called the Black Legionnaires, or something like that. And he had, you saw the movie, they kind of redid that in Spike Lee's movie as well. But his dad had some problems because of what he was teaching and how he was teaching, and he had to see these guys, and they kind of did the same thing to Malcolm's house that later happened in Malcolm's house in New York by black men. Next slide. Okay, right here, you have 1926. I'll just show the correlation with Malcolm's life and other things that were going on. As you know, the Moorish Science Temple, this is 1926. This is a photo of the Moorish Science Temple in 1926. So just kind of showing some correlations. I don't have time to go into, I do a history of all these organizations and where they started from and their origins. I don't have time today to do that, but let's, next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Those are the actual guys that, you know, the Circle 7 Quran, that book that basically came off of those other two, those guys, the Rosicrucians and a guy named Levi Dowling. Levi Dowling wrote a book in 1907 called The Aquarian Gospel of Jesus Christ, and the Rosicrucians had a book called Unto Thee I Grant, and that Circle 7 Quran is basically a compilation of those two books. But next slide. Ooh. Okay, June 8th, 1927. So Malcolm was 2 years old here. This is an original copy from the FBI, Freedom of Information Act. This is the letter that Malcolm X's father wrote to President Coolidge for the release of Marcus Garvey. I said. So as you know, this is 1927. So this would be when J. Edgar Hoover was getting a fresh start as a young man. You know, Marcus Garvey was his first big project in the black community, taking him down. And so if you have somebody writing a letter like this, that person all of a sudden becomes somebody of interest. Is that correct? I went on the FBI's website myself, and I looked for my grandfather's name. And I was able to find a letter that the FBI intercepted that my grandfather never got, that Dr. King sent him. So they were in the business of not only intercepting letters, spying on people, using our own people, of course, but they were also in the business of manufacturing fake letters. And we're going to get into that a little bit later when it comes to the beef and the rift between Malcolm and the hierarchy of the Nation of Islam. Next slide. The Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey again gets deported December 2nd, 1927. They brought him up on mail fraud, false charges. Remember that famous statement, "Look for me in the whirlwind." It's the last time people saw and heard of him, And then they even reported that he was dead before he was dead. Now, I heard the story that he read it, he was dead, and he died after that. Liberate the minds of men, and ultimately you will liberate the bodies of men. Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Next slide.
They only got him on one count of mail fraud.
That's right, and he wasn't even guilty of that.
One count. Out of all the stuff and all the people that was involved, Marcus Garvey was found guilty of one count of mail fraud that he did not.
And he was not even guilty of that. That's the Malcolm X home site. So Malcolm X home site is a very interesting story I'll get into later. The person who actually lives in the house that Malcolm and his family lived in when they got firebombed today is Farrakhan's chauffeur and his family. They live there now. That's kind of a weird situation. But next slide.
That house was owned by the Nation of Islam. That's why that's going down like that.
That's right. Ooh, next slide. I don't have time. Now, the stock market crash influenced a lot. There were a lot of people coming over here, a lot of scam artists coming over, mostly from India, from Pakistan. And in the early 1900s, there was something called the Indian Exclusion Act. And I'll get into that in more detail later. But they didn't want guys from India coming over here because they were making a lot of money off of gullible, poor black people. They were coming to Detroit and Chicago mostly. And they were making a lot of money with all these religious and magical things they were doing. And so some of this has to do with what I'm talking about, but I just don't have the time to go in detail. But I will at another time. So next slide. That's the house their house got firebombed on November 7, 1929. So Malcolm was only 4 years old when his family's house was firebombed. And his dad had to get the strap, is what they said. That was in Lansing, Michigan. Next slide. All right, so Malcolm, I'll say, I got the mic. I'm not standing here speaking to you as an American or a patriot or a flag saluter or a flag waver. No, I'm not. I'm speaking as a victim of this American system, and I see America through the eyes of a victim. I don't see any American dream. I see an American nightmare. Ballad with a Bullet. If you haven't heard that speech, go on YouTube, it's right on there, and listen to that speech. Because that speech is still relevant today, by the way. I also do a presentation on the Star-Spangled Banner and Francis Scott Key and the whole history of that. So anybody that wants me to come do that, I will come handle that as well. Next slide. There's Malcolm in first grade, I believe. All right. Now Malcolm was the smartest student in all of his classes, by the way. He was also the only black one there. And remember in his book, he said he thought his name was nigger because that's what they called him all the time. Next slide. Yep. Around this same time, we saw a lot going on in Ethiopia around this same time, but I just don't have time to go into it. But the whole point is the deification of the black image was on the rise around this time. So next slide. Next slide. I don't have time to deal with that right now. Next slide. Okay, we're going into another era when Malcolm is about to lose his father and basically become orphaned. Next slide. So he enrolled in Pleasant Grove Elementary School in 1931 when he was about 6 years old. Next slide. This is another article from the death of Malcolm X's father. Now Malcolm X's father was killed. He did not commit suicide, all right? He did not jump in front of a trolley track to go, or he did not misstep and slip and fall on the way to go get his jacket, or whatever they tried to say. Here's what happened. He was killed, all right? He was murdered. Malcolm's father was a responsible guy. He had 2 life insurance policies. He had a small policy and he had a large policy. The large policy would have taken care of his family. The small policy was not enough. The small policy paid out, but the large policy used the lie in the police report to not pay, because you know if you commit suicide, that is a breach of contract of your life insurance policy. They won't pay out. Malcolm was one of 7 children under his father and mother, actually one of 10 children, because his father was married before that and had 3 children. But in this family, he was one of 7 children. They say he went back for a coat, okay, and that's how he got hit. But remember, his head was bashed in, and he was almost sliced all the way in half. And he still lived for 2 hours after that. So a whole day. So the man was actually suffered before he died, very badly. And they basically lied so that Malcolm's family couldn't get the money. So that's how they fell on hard times, and that's how all of the children ended up scattered, and the mother ended up going into a mental institution. She had a nervous breakdown. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, next slide. Can't talk about that right now. So she was denied in 1932 of the policy that would have helped take care of that family. Next slide. There's Malcolm in his class photograph. I don't see anybody else with melanin in that class. Do you? Yeah, you're the only one. Next slide. And I remember that he told his teacher that he wanted to be an attorney, and the teacher discouraged him, saying that his own people would never support him and that white people surely wouldn't do it, but that he would make a good carpenter. He should work with his hands. And so that kind of killing of the spirit happens in school. How many of you guys, when you were little, had somebody discourage you from something, a dream that you had that was supposed to be responsible for inspiring you or motivating you? So it's not just something that happened back in the day. It's something that still goes on. Happened to me too. Okay, so the Honorable Elijah Muhammad went by several different names. And he was also a Baptist minister before. He was an alcoholic when he was younger. He's from Sandersville, Georgia. And he was actually in the UNIA for a minute. He was briefly in Allah's Temple of Islam, and then it was the Nation of Islam. But he had a fallout with a brother of his when Fard Muhammad or Wallace Dodd Ford or Wally Dodd Fard, whatever, all his aliases, right? When he basically left and went back to wherever he went, to LA, then New Zealand, or wherever, he ended up going back to Pakistan. But wherever he went, he actually spent some years in hiding because there were some people trying to kill him, and I think it was going on both sides before he actually came out. Now he went into the jail system, which is why you have in the early 40s and 50s, you have some changes being made into the jail system where they were allowing brothers to kind of decide certain things they wouldn't eat, like pork, and you have the Qurans, the Maulana Muhammad Ali version, and the Yusuf Ali version. This is from the Ahmadiyya. The Ahmadiyya movement from India, they're the ones that brought these English translated Qurans to America, okay? So when you say Assalamu alaikum, that's not Arabic, that's Urdu. Arabic will be Assalamu alaikum, right? So I don't know if the brothers knew back then that they were speaking more Urdu, because Fard Muhammad never wrote in Arabic, he only wrote in Urdu and in English. And I think that they thought that might have been Arabic back then, but that's actually Urdu, because the man was not from Mecca, he was actually from India. Next slide. Pakistan is really the area he was from, but it wasn't called Pakistan then, because Pakistan got its name in 1947. Next slide. All right, this is a timeline of things that happened. You know, the FBI got authority to pursue fascists and communists in 1936. Now, under that label of communist, what did that mean when they said communist? That was a key word. What did that mean? Right. When they say communist, they're talking about us. Anybody that was against white power and capitalism, they were called a communist back then. So that was code word for them having authority to pursue us and monitor us and send agents or send informants in on us way back in 1936. I don't know if you knew this, but Dr. King, they started monitoring him when he was 15 years old. That's the year he entered Morehouse College. He was 15, and they opened a file on him. If you go to the FBI's website, you'll see that they opened a file on Dr. King when he was 15 years old. All right? Malcolm's mother Louis Little had a nervous breakdown, Louise Little, and she was declared legally insane in 1938. In 1939, she went to a mental hospital where she stayed for 26 years. Malcolm and his siblings were separated by the state in the same year. Malcolm is sent to Michigan State Detention Home. Malcolm begins school at Mason High School, and it's also the beginning of World War II. He drops out of school at the age of 15, never to return, until he returned to debate PhDs and win against them. Next slide. That's Malcolm's sister when he went to Boston to live with her, Ella Little Collins. And look how he was dressed back then. I think Spike Lee tried to capture that in the movie, where they had the cocked hairdo and the oversized jackets and the pants that were up to your chest line. I think some of the older guys still wear pants up to their chest line. Next slide. Next slide. That's the house that Ella lived in, that Malcolm lived in, when he started becoming this other guy that they called Detroit Red. Start doing a little hustling and all that. Start getting his Nipsey hustle on. Next slide. Without education, you're not going anywhere in this world. And at this time, Malcolm didn't have education. He had a street education at this time. At this time, he was about survival. Next slide. Next slide. So you see he still has the cocked hairdo right here. Has anybody seen this photo before? He's seen this cocked hairdo right here. He moves to Boston. He works odd jobs like dishwashing, shoe shining, soda jerking. Now soda jerking is a job that doesn't exist anymore.
What's it called? Soda jerking?
I'm gonna let one of the elders tell you what's soda jerking. You don't know what soda jerking is?
Oh, dang, it was before them.
Soda jerking is a menial job like shining shoes, where basically you get a bottle, because back then they had it in the glass bottles. And you basically jerk it, you shake it, and you pop it open for somebody, and you hand it to them. They called it soda jerking back then. I know. He also worked for the New Haven Railroad,
jerk the soda.
and that's where he was exposed to the criminal world, working for that railroad. Next slide. Now, the same year that he did this, Elijah Muhammad gets arrested in D.C., and he was in prison for 4 years for violation of the Selective Services Act. Basically, he was telling people not to join the draft, okay? Next slide. So at this time, 1943, he moves to Harlem, New York, and he officially becomes that guy, that Detroit Red guy who's doing everything under the sun, things that you know about and things you probably don't want to know about, is what Malcolm was doing back then. And that's how he looked back then. Next slide. So that's part of the Harlem Renaissance. We talk about that when I go into further detail, and how that Harlem Renaissance culture affected him. Next slide. Now, this is one of his mugshots. Have you seen that? he had several mugshots back then. He wasn't that good of a criminal. He kept getting caught. So 1944, they called him Red. He gets indicted for larceny, goes back to Boston. He's given a 3-month suspended sentence and a 1-year probation. I think at that time it was a watch that he stole and he tried to pawn it in the pawn shop. And they caught him with that. Next slide.
24. 19, finger back.
1945, he goes back to Harlem, New York, gets right back into the scene. Next slide. This is when, 1945, they dropped the bomb on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. The United States was getting the gangster on back here, on this year. Next slide. Next slide. 1946, Jomo Kenyatta and Kwame Nkrumah, they formed the Pan-African Federation. Ashe. And this merger, or this formation, would later in life influence Malcolm. And we'll talk about that when we get to that year. Next slide. Elijah Muhammad is released from prison in 1940, memorized, in order to get an X. Malcolm X earned his X by reciting these things by heart, and also by writing a letter in the same handwriting that Elijah Muhammad wrote a letter to Fard Muhammad. And that's the process you go through when you join the Nation of Islam to get your X.
Secrets.
There's something called actual facts and student enrollment. And Chicago has to send you back this letter and say you wrote it right. And then you have to go in front of the captain and the minister of your mosque, and they have to give you the blessing and say, okay, you recited these facts correctly. Okay? Next slide. And all that, I was saying all that information, most of it goes back to Kemet, some of it goes back to India with the Buddhists. Next slide. We were talking about the X, because Malcolm said the X meant unknown. In our culture, that X meant resurrection. When you saw the X, you knew that this was going to be something that not going to be dead forever, going to get back up. That's Patah right there. It stood for resurrection. Next slide. That is the home in Chicago that now Louis Farrakhan dwells in, but that's where Elijah Muhammad took up residence. And that is circa 1953, Malcolm X moved to Chicago, and he actually for a minute lived in that home with Elijah Muhammad. Next slide. 1953, I don't know how many of you guys knew this. The FBI opens a surveillance file on Malcolm X. This is 12 years before he dies. They were surveilling him non-stop from 1953 up until February 21st, 1965. Next slide. Who's that?
Minister Louis Farrakhan.
He's 8 years younger than Malcolm X. He was born in 1933, Malcolm born 1925. May 8th, May 19th. This is September 1953. He becomes a minister of Mosque number 11 in Boston. Now, he ended up passing that ministry on to Louis Wilcott X at the time. They called him the Charmer. He was a calypso singer, all right? And he ended up running that mosque. That mosque became very famous for beating brothers up and putting brothers in the hospital for minor infractions like not selling enough newspapers, trying to quit, missing a meeting. And there was a brother who actually has an article in the Jet magazine who was a victim of that. They broke his rib and they broke his nose and messed his eye socket up. He was beat up for one of those minor offenses. The captain of that mosque is a man named Clarence 2X Gill. Clarence 2X Gill was also from the Caribbean, just like Farrakhan, just like Malcolm's parents actually. And they're from Trinidad, okay? This guy was a very violent guy. He was also the security for Muhammad Ali. And he was also at the Audubon Ballroom when Malcolm was shot. And we know that because one of Malcolm's men, Reuben Francis, shot him in the stomach that day. Next slide. That's mosque number 7 in Harlem. I'm sure Professor Grant has been around that area several times. In 1954, Malcolm becomes the minister of this mosque. He opened up a bunch of mosques. He was the #1 recruiter in the nation. Next slide. He becomes minister of Temple number 12 in in Philadelphia, 1955. Next slide. That is the old flyer, Farrakhan, one of his performance flyers before he joined the nation. When he was called Louis Eugene Walcott, and he was a calypso singer. But Elijah Muhammad told the ministers if they wanted to stay in the ministry, that the ones who were in the entertainment industry, they had to make a choice and either go full-time entertainment or full-time ministry. And at that time, he decided to go full-time ministry. Louis Farrakhan joined the Nation of Islam in 1955. Next slide. That's showing Emmett Till. How many of you guys have been to the museum in DC, the African American? You haven't been in that room, the Emmett Till room? Really emotional, right? Next slide. Wallace Muhammad tells, now 1955 is when Wallace Muhammad, the son of Elijah Muhammad, tells Malcolm X about the secretaries that Elijah Muhammad was impregnating. There were 6 of them. 4 of them, they each had 1 child by him. 1 had 2 children, another had 3, okay? And they were all shunned and punished by the Nation of Islam following. So they could not have been wives if they were allowed to be treated like that. Clara Muhammad was his actual wife, by the way. And by the way, according to Professor Grant, Malcolm already knew about this. And so did Farrakhan. Because one of those women was in Farrakhan's mosque in Boston, by the way. And one of those women was Malcolm X's ex-girlfriend. I don't know if you knew that. He was, before Betty Shabazz, he had courted, because you can't date in the Nation of Islam. You can only court, and it's for 3 months. After 3 months, you gotta decide whether you want to get married or not. If you don't want to get married, you can't see her no more. If you do want to get married, you gotta get engaged right then and there. And it's all supervised by chaperones who are married. So it's very strict in the Nation of Islam, right?
I like that.
So before Betty Shabazz, Malcolm had, I guess, a girlfriend named Evelyn, and he sent her to Arizona. Elijah Muhammad had a house in Arizona to get Elijah's approval. But Elijah, instead of giving the approval, he gave her penis. So that's how that happened. Next slide.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
This is what you would see when you go into the Nation of Islam. Back then it would scare people because the black people in the community weren't used to that. They would go in there and see that on the back wall, and they would get scared and walk out before they even heard the speech. Next slide.
I have a letter that you need to see from Malcolm. This is a copy of this letter, and in this letter, Malcolm he's talking about the woman that you just talked about.
Yeah.
That, in other words, Malcolm he's elevating Elijah, he's putting Elijah up on a high pedestal. You understand? So I didn't know what you just said.
Oh yeah.
But that just explains, I mean, and Malcolm was being very humble in coming to him. You need to see the letter. I'll give you a copy.
Thank you. I'll put it in my presentation.
No problem. You got it.
All right.
All right, that's what Malcolm X celebration all about.
All right. Please don't forget. Now I didn't write this. Somebody wrote dead 4/4/68 on this picture of Dr. King. He was arrested this year when he was 27 years old. That's kind of when he came on the scene as a civil rights leader. Next slide. So these are 3 men who really heavily influenced Malcolm. You want to take a picture of that slide, you can. What influenced Malcolm about them is that they used armed resistance. When Elijah Muhammad was talking about threatening the white man with weather, tornadoes and hurricanes and rain and sleet and snow, and spaceships and mother planes and baby planes, which the government knew didn't exist, and they knew that the weather wasn't being orchestrated by Farrakhan Muhammad. So because the Nation of Islam did not allow their men to have weapons, they were only militant in form, but not really in substance. They weren't really a threat. Malcolm was a threat when he left the Nation of Islam because he started talking about arming people. And he started talking about these men who doing the same thing. That's why he became more of a threat. Next slide. Patrice Lumumba assassinated 1961, January 17th. Next slide. Ashe. Malcolm said the Negro Revolution is controlled by foxy white liberals, by the government itself, but the black revolution is controlled only by God. Next slide. 1961 is the year he became the national representative as well. he held that job for only a few years. Although it might seem longer, 1962 was the year that Nelson Mandela got in prison too. Next slide. Organization of African Unity was set up in 1963, May 25th. That's also African Unity Day, right?
That's right. Yes, sir.
Next slide. Medgar Evers murdered 1963, June 12th. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, that's my grandfather right there. Wow. Dr. Thomas Kilgore Jr. Next slide. This really affected Malcolm. You remember this? Birmingham, Alabama? The 4 little girls that got bombed in that church? And Malcolm wanted to do something about it. He wanted to be more vocal, but he was not given permission to. So he started feeling a little certain type of way about that. That kind of got under his skin. Next slide. That's Malcolm at the Miami compound of Muhammad Ali, or Cassius Clay, 1963, with the children. Next slide. That's just them taking some outing with them together. Next slide. Assassination of the president, where his statements about that were used against him to sit him down supposedly for 90 days, but it was really indefinitely. They were never going to let him back in until they were told to let him back in, but it was too late by that time. Next slide. He responds to the reporter. He didn't say anything about the assassination during his speech. He only responded to a reporter, and that's what got him in trouble. Next slide. Silence for 90 days.
Intelligent black queen, yeah, that's what I am. Here to bring you education from across the land. With the rugby from Chi-Town to the streets down in Watts, San Pedro, Long Beach, and Carson, where I rock. You see, I don't know everything, but I know who I am, as well as who I want to be. In the future is planned through my actions and my tactics that I work on today. No time for wasting time being a mental slave. I had to liberate my mind, body, and my soul, and ask myself, what are the steps in order to go? I walk with my head high as I go through the day, even though I'm constantly dealing with heartbreak. You see, being black is different here in 2019, where everything might seem alright, but that's not really how it be. So let us all come together from the Bay to the Bronx and build a nation just like Malcolm had in mind. Take a look through my eyes and my eyes and my eyes. I look through my eyes and my eyes and my eyes. It's no surprise. So take a look, check me. Yeah. Take a look through my eyes. Take a look through my eyes. It's no surprise, yeah. It's no surprise. Take a look through my eyes. Take a look through my eyes, yeah. I look through my eyes, yeah. Yeah. All right, that's that. Thank you. Power of the people living in the city. On and on, on and on. Say, power of the people living in the city. On and on, on and on. So early in my life, I learned that if you want something, you better make some noise. Malcolm X. For these are the words that had pierced my heart and ignited my spirit. For I was tired of being silent and tight-lipped. Tired of hoping, dreaming, wishing, praying, singing over and over again. A change is gonna come. I was tired of silencing my voice in a room full of blue stockings as if my mind was unworthy or unable to comprehend. For the spirit of my ancestors are rooted deep within, and you can feel them as I'm writing this poem with a paper and a pen. I had to free my mind, I had to face my reality and unravel this part of my mentality that change is in the hands of one, no, see, because change is in the hands of many. Collective liberation stems from individual responsibility and self-affirmation. So if you want to make a change, think about what you can do. Whether it's calming down your brother before he begins to act a fool, or giving back to your community in any way you can. So make some noise You want to spread this message across the land as I say, power to people living in the city, on and on, on and on. Say power to people living on and on. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Steve Jones Jr. My grandmother is Yvonne Woodward. Yvonne Woodward is also a Little. Yvonne Little. Yvonne. So I am the great nephew of Malcolm X. There's only a couple of us left as men in the family. I try to hide in the shadows sometimes. But there's something that you all should know. The FBI did not have a file on Malcolm at that time, 1953. They had a file when he was put in jail, as a kid, when he went to that, when he, as a kid. So they started that file when he was a kid, but also they don't have his middle name. They don't know Malcolm's middle name to this day. So I'll leave that with you guys, okay? All right, his name is Asquith. Asquith. And his mom is from Grenada, and his dad is from Reynolds, Georgia. That's my great-grandfather, Earl Little. He was cut in half, but he lived all day. He lived that entire day. He died the next day. Okay, so there's three things about Malcolm that you guys should know. He kept a briefcase, his glasses, and what was the third thing he always kept? A watch. That's right, a watch. So, and also, before he left the house, he said, I never leave the house without a shirt and a tie. So you guys can clap to that. Clap to that, please. I had a tie, and I'm like, no, tie isn't working, ancestors. But those are the three things, and I just wanted to talk to you guys about that and 1619. If you do the math, and you take 1619, and they talk about 400 years, 400 years. 1619 plus 400 makes what? 2019. Okay? So this is the year of the awakening. We all awakened right here, right now, this year. November was that date, that time, but it's now. It's now. It is now. I feel it right now. My family would be proud of you guys. Celebrating. I want to do one more thing. I don't know if you guys all said it. Let's say happy birthday, Uncle Malcolm. Happy birthday, Uncle Malcolm. That's right. He is my uncle and he is yours too. I want to share him like I'll go around everywhere. I've never been out of the country, but everywhere I go in the U.S., I see Malcolm. So it's beautiful.